Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Allie Fisher, and I'm the Communications and EDI Associate for Oregon Wild, and I'll be your MC for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us today for the First Foods and Life Cycles webcast. I'm honored to introduce our very special guest, Wenix Red Elk. She is the Education Outreach Coordinator for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and we'll be discussing the life cycles of native plants and animals, along with more specifics about the preparation of first foods like salmon, deer, elk, camas bulbs, biscuit root, and huckleberry. She will also be explaining tribal history as it relates to these first foods while reflecting on how this translates to life today. I would also like to include a land acknowledgement in this space. I would like to offer gratitude to the land itself and for those who have lived here in Oregon since time immemorial, like the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, who make up the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I'd like to acknowledge not only the forests, rivers, mountains, and deserts that those of us at Oregon Wild celebrate and work to conserve, but also places of art and industry, science, commerce, and community that are built upon these lands. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the lands today, as well as historical events, including colonial legacies and wrongdoings like forced removal that have long-lasting and current impacts. Lastly, I'd like to extend gratitude towards our speaker tonight for this time to create this space of communal learning and growth. In 1855, the three tribes signed a treaty with the US government in which it ceded over 6.4 million acres to the United States. The tribes reserved rights to fish, hunt, and gather foods and medicines on unclaimed lands. Tribal members continue to exercise these rights throughout the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation area of traditional use. This is part of what we will be discussing tonight. Additionally, a recording of this program will be emailed out tomorrow and will be posted on our website, OregonWild.org, in the Wild blog. Please enter your questions at any time. We normally get a flood of these right at the end of the presentation. So the sooner you can get yours in, the easier it is for us to organize and answer these after our guest has finished presenting. Lastly, make sure to RSVP for our next webinar on August 25th about facing the heat, the impact of climate change on forests and wildlife. You can find this online at OregonWild.org. Now I will play a quick 5-minute video and then pass it off to our presenter.
Then creation was complete, man and woman, the yellow of the earth, the red of our blood, the red of our life, and the blue of the heavens above, our spirit. We were created in these three steps in our belief. But the Creator had already had things on this world that were here prior. So as a man stood on the east side looking to the west, and the woman stood on the west looking to the east, all creation came before them. The first to speak and give of himself, and he spoke for all the life, the water life that followed him was the salmon. As the first food, he gave and sacrificed of himself. After salmon, all the water life named of itself, all the salmonoid species, all the resident fish species, down to the shako, the clams. The second to speak of the first foods was a deer. The deer gave of himself to be our food. He gave us his bones to become our tools. He gave his skin to become our clothing. And then he also gave to us one of the biggest gifts of his hide to make the drum. After the deer spoke, then all the animals that walked the land named themselves in order in the first foods as they went along. Elk, antelope, moose, buffalo, even down to the groundhog, which is a food as well. And they gave a promise that they can never change. And from the day of the beginning to this day, they're still the same. So then creation turned and looked to the west, and it was the woman stood. Then all the plant life and roots that we use named themselves to her. And the first to speak was the bitterroot. I am Piache, I will be your food. But before anybody harvests, you've got to have that ceremony to recognize that new growth. And that was the law that was made. Then the roots, all in order, named themselves. Many, many, many roots. Luke, Chau, Sasmita, Anipash, Panku, Mammon, all kinds of different roots that some of them we don't even harvest now these days ourselves. And then the berries then spoke to the woman. And they named themselves in the order. But the one to speak was the Wilnu, the Huckleberry. And like any good grandmother, wanted to see all of her children go first before her. That's why she's always served at the last part, at the end. Then after all the berries named themselves in order that they give themselves, then creation all looked back to the man, to the east. And at that time is when the water spoke. In Ashwanisha, I am water. I will be the blood of our mother, the earth. From me you are born. Both men and women are born from water. The meal is not done until the end when you drink water and you pray again. The salmon that went and came back and never changed, never broke that promise. The animals that live in the mountains that can never change, they've never broken that promise. When European people have come and brought us all the easy things of life, many years ago it was a gun, metal, knives. Things were easy, made easier. Canvas, homes, cars, airplanes, TV, internet, everything this day that makes our life easier takes us that much farther away from our first foods. We're the ones that have changed. And it's up to us now to change ourselves back, to reacquaint ourselves with that great law that can never be changed. Chi, Iwan Kushna Shtamanachen, Nami Outnin, Natkurat Miai. This is a testimony I give in relationship to our first foods, the holy, sacred foods. Audyanagusnash Ashapawachakai Shanami Minash in Miai. And I commit this to recording for the future of my children. Kukna Chanaman Kuki Wadakna Lalakwe, that perhaps it will never be left behind. Chao Shwachi in Misinwit, because these are not my words. Pusha Shash. Imagine Shamamik Nisinwit. Because I'm only repeating and echoing the words of my elders.
Pascalawa inam latiwa kahimuma inam wanakissa Wenix wawahia about. Hello, my name is Wenix Red Elk, and my name means echoing from a mountain canyon as it rises from the ground and comes up. Today, what I'm going to be talking about is first foods. We call it Outnid Toquata. It's talking about a holy, sacred concept and how that relates to the beginning of time and the law that our tribe follows. We'll be talking about the life cycles and the current day management practices that our tribe has developed based on that first foods creation story, which is our first law, and how we're working to restore those foods back to the landscape and to secure them across, secure ecological process across the landscape for future generations. I'm with the Confederated Tribe of the Umatilla Reservation's Department of Natural Resources and Cultural Resource Protection Program. So what we're talking about earlier is in the land acknowledgement, our tribe was signed in 1855, and it brought the Cayuse, the Umatillan, which are the Umatilla, and the Walilapu, the Walla Wallas, together into one tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. This darker area that you see, the dark gray area, that is the 6.4 million acres that the tribe ceded. Basically what that means is that when we gave up that land, we ceded it and reserved that territory so we could continue to practice retained treaty rights, meaning we never gave those rights away. We have always secured the right to be able to fish, to be able to hunt, to gather and harvest, and to be able to have a place to live, and to gather those cultural necessities that are related to our culture and the importance to our people, and to be able to access that landscape to which that is. We also reserve what's called the usual and custom areas. That is areas that our tribe went to prior to the treaties, and we were still able to access those. Sometimes we have to work hard to secure those rights in certain areas, but we never gave that away. And so when we did that treaty, we reserved those rights, and then we also became a sovereign nation, and we're governed ourselves. We created a constitution and bylaws in 1949, and we adopted them. So we have a board of trustees that basically governs and runs the tribe and works on anything related to that policy and protection of our tribal rights and and to be able to govern ourselves. And we also have a general council, which is the voice of all the tribal members, basically the stockholders within the tribe, to be able to make decisions related to the tribe and how it's run and governing ourselves. We currently have about 31,000, maybe 32,000 tribal members, give or take. And so traditionally, our traditional use areas went quite vastly. And the brown area, the real dark area, is the density of kind of where we did a lot of our gathering within that 6.4 million acres. And then this kind of shows the areas we were traveling across the landscape. We're currently updating this map because we were going further down along to Utah, further into Nevada. We were following the Salt Trail, and we were going a little bit further, and we had our tribal elders had remembered stories, and also looking back at different archives, different materials that show we were in vaster areas. So we're working on updating that and showing the true amount of areas that we were accessing. We have always been a tribe that follows the seasonal round, because in that traditional teaching of the Tamanwa, when those foods are coming forward, they're coming forward in the seasons that they come available. Like the salmon, when they came forth, they come forth early, and we harvest in that area or within that time zone. And so everything we do culturally related to the foods is we follow them as they come forth and are ready. And that is the timing. If for some reason we're not ready for them, we're going to miss them. So all of our cultural practices really portray on what is going on with that food at the time when it's ready. And sometimes due to climate change, we miss those opportunities where we go to look for something that's usually there at a certain time, and it's too hot, it got too cold, and we missed that opportunity. So we might have to go to different locations to be able to access or find it. Our Department of Natural Resources mission, we had included that traditional law, and we made it a mission so we could help guide us based on our foods and that first teaching that is governed to us from the beginning of time, which is to protect, restore, and enhance the tribe's first food, which is chush, water, nusuk, salmon, yamish, deer, kaush, which is the biscuit root, and wiwinu, which is huckleberry, for the perpetual cultural, economic, and the sovereign benefits of the tribe. We accomplish this by utilizing traditional ecological knowledge of our people first, and science to inform two things: looking at population and habitat management goals and actions of those foods, and creating natural resource policies and regulatory mechanisms. We have our own way of creating policies of when we go fishing, when we go hunting, how that looks for our tribal people. And each tribe has that specifically to them. And this is what our people have decided related to our areas and how we're managing these resources in a sustainable way in our area specific for our tribe, to make sure that those resources are the populations are strong, and they're able to be there on the landscape. So we're not hurting them when we're gathering, but we're using the best practices to be able to help assist them in growing, even by the way we harvest them. And so when we're doing that, it's really important. This is a table. And when Thomas was talking in the creation story, he's talking about how those foods come up. So if you went to our longhouse, whenever we do our ceremonies to set the foods and we're celebrating our first foods feast, there's a certain order those foods lay down on the table, which is water first, fish, the deer species, the root species, and the berry species. And that's because that's how they came forward in that creation story. And each species has a grouping, and anything within that grouping is going to be laid down within the timing that they come available. Like, you know, we usually set salmon first because they came first in the order, and then after that would be smelt as early, and then you have eel, and then steelhead, and it would just come. And if you had whitefish would come forward because they're like the first ones that come out. So it just depends what the food is and what you have available when you're cooking that. And in our longhouse, the way it goes out. We have lined up our programs to be able to manage these foods, which is the water resource program for the water, the fisheries program, fish, wildlife program for our hunting, anything related. And those three all encompass looking at the habitat and restoring that for those species. And then we have the couch, which is the root bearing species, and the huckleberry, the wiwinu, which is the shrubs from the understory to the overstory. And you have range, egg, and forestry program. And when our programs are working with these species, they have to be able to be available and be out on the site and out on the land when those foods come available, to be able to study them or manage them, and to be able even to, when they're doing restoration programs, to be able to put things down when they're dormant, when they're not in the full of their production. And so everything that our Department of Natural Resources does really is based on the life cycles of that food, and how are we going to apply those best practices to that. We have a cultural resource protection program that works on anything above ground, in ground, cultural sites, our ancestors that have passed away, and helping protect and preserve our culture. Our First Foods Policy Program helps to create policies that help regulate and manage those. Our Environmental Science Program works on anything related to the air and looking at the science behind some of those foods. And then we have Education Outreach, which what I do for all those programs. And so before we go out and harvest, every year we have to wait till those foods are ready. We have leaders of our longhouse that the men, they watch the men's food. The women, they watch the women's food. As the roots become available or the other species become available, they're the ones who are checking those species. And soon as the roots are ready, the women will come back, the leader will say, it's time to dig, and give them the date. And then we set what's called our first foods feast. Nobody can go out and harvest until that feast comes. And so this is a picture of what's called the children's feast. The week before the children's feast, we have the big community feast where all the women, the families, they go out and gather for themselves. And then the week after, one of our educators, Linda Sampson, she started the children's feast, which has been really amazing because she has helped our youth to be able to go out. And even though the families that don't do that, or they don't have somebody in their family that knows that part of the culture, to help get those kids together and to bring them out. So you see on one side, you have the little kids out here, and then the females, and then the males on this side. And we also have these little kids matched up with our high school students. And so they have to learn the songs that when they go out to harvest and gather, to prepare for that, to get ready for it. So they start early in the wintertime learning the songs and learning even how to set the tables related to the order that those foods are going to come and to be placed. And you're recognizing them related to that creation story and that promise we gave to these fruits at the beginning of time. So if you ever came to our longhouse, you would see that we set foods down on the table in the order that they came forward. And so down here, this blue represents water. And as I click, you're going to see different circles coming down across this. It's basically tables. If you came to our longhouse and came to a feast, it's set in this way where you have tables running up from one area, and then the tables at the top facing east, that's where our drummers set, our 7 drums. They sit back here and they sing for the foods. As the foods come out, they start singing, and we walk all the foods out. And then after, we stand on this, that brown area represents dirt from all 4 different areas of our reservation, and we call that the wash. And so on the tables, the first thing that goes down is the water, because it's the first of all things. And then at the end of the meal, we'll drink water again to close it up. So the first thing that goes down is all the fish species. The salmon will be the first one that's set out, and men and young children will come out and set. And when they do this, it's usually from the oldest man to the youngest will carry these foods out in a line and set them down on the table. After all the fish species are set out, and these circles just are representing groupings, then you have all the other foods that come out. So if you look down here at the very bottom of the table, over to your left-hand side, the gray represents the salmon, which represents all the fish species. So they'll be set in the line in their ecological order of the aquatic species of how they come out across the land. And then you would have the brown represents the animal species, and it would be elk, deer, and then you'd have like buffalo, antelope. It'd be the other species that go behind there, or whatever is available. When you come to the longhouse, the food comes in, and sometimes you never know if you're going to have elk or deer, if you're going to have buffalo. It's whatever the community brings in to you or gathers for that. So as it comes in, the cooks will decide how those foods are going to come out and what's going to set on the table. And so you never really know until the dinner sit to see what's available. And then you have your root bearing species, which represents the yellow, and then your berry species. And usually on the roots, it'll be like celery, bitterroot, lox, couch. On the purple, it would be huckleberries, choke cherries, and then elderberries, whatever else goes in the line as they come available. So this is kind of an example of, traditionally we used to sit on the ground and we'd be in longhouses. We still have some ceremonies where they do use longhouses in certain areas. And in our tribal longhouse, we sit in a longhouse, we sit at tables, but the traditions and the songs are still the same. We've just adapted a little bit. So I'm going to show you how foods kind of cross across the landscape and how they come available in their seasons and they move up into the elevations. So right here, this white line is representing the Umatilla watershed basin, and this is just one basin. The river up here is the Nichiwana, which is the Columbia, and so the Columbia is coming from Boardman down to McNary, and then we have the interaction of the rivers coming forward. So historically, the rivers all flow through them, or through the Umatilla Basin, and for about 80 years, we didn't have any salmon available. We're currently working on restoration, and about 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago, we restored salmon back to the watershed of the Umatilla, and this just represents the area that those fish were flowing. And then, as you see, when the fish start coming up, then we prepare and get ready for the root feast. And so as we start digging the roots, we start moving up from the bottom of the watershed up to foothills. And this represents the roots coming across the Blue Mountains, the couch and the root bearing species. And some roots, they don't grow anywhere within our reservation. This little tiny orange line represents our reservation, and this is flowing down across. Over the Hepner area, sometimes we have to go a couple hours away even just to dig our bitterroots, because they don't all grow within that area. That's why it was so critical to have that 6.4 million acres, because we have to gather those foods to have them available on those tables when we're feasting for them, because they called themselves in the beginning of time. After the root species, which is now, after the roots are pretty much gone, we start gathering Wumanu. And so we're currently right now gathering Huckleberry, and then working, so we're in the higher mountain elevation now, we're in the upper part. And now it's, since August 1st happened, we're able to hunt, but because it's so hot, our hunters usually don't go out until it's cool enough, because we're taught certain things, and if you can't take care of it in heat like this, you just don't go out, unless for some reason some family really need it. How you gather it and how it's done, and that really there's also cultural teachings related to when we gather, when we don't gather, when they're birthing, when they're not birthing, when the animal has thin skin or thick skin. So there's cultural teachings that also go around of how we're harvesting things. And so this kind of shows that this is the table and the representation of those foods across the system. Let me watch my time real quick. So first foods are the center of our culture, and it's very important how we do this. Right here kind of shows when we have the first foods feast, we have, all of us are sitting out ready, and the women over here are setting the foods out in the order that they come. And when it's time for us to set the tables, they line all the men up first, and they set all the men's foods first. And then the women's come forward and they set the women's foods next in those life cycles as they come forward. And so when you're looking at all the roots, you can tell what is the first thing that you gather and what is that timing just on that table alone. We also have, this is my daughter up here, the little girl with the purple dress, and she's holding her roots for the first time she went out digging. And this is the first time she learned to set the table. And I went with her and I showed her where to set, and I followed just to make sure she was doing what she was supposed to. And so that was the first time. So it's also us being able to, if we didn't have these foods, we wouldn't be able to pass these down to our youth. And so when we're talking about those feasts, we're not able to go out and tell them we have celery feast, salmon feast, root feast, huckleberry feast, and in the timings that they are. Salmon feast is usually celebrated down at Celilo. Before, we'd have it wherever was related to where we'd go gather it. Celilo is kind of the main place that all the tribes, because in Oregon, we have multiple tribes, but on the Columbia, we have the Columbia River tribes. And so we gather down there and we feast together, but we don't go salmon fishing until that feast is done. These foods are very important because they are tied to our ceremony. And so we have to wait when the young men, it's time for them to go fishing. They have to wait for when those fish are coming, and then their parents or their uncles, they bring them out so they can catch their first salmon or their first kill. And the thing that's important about this is so they become young men and providers of that food. And once they're providers, anybody can ask them to go out to go hunting and fishing, and they would tell their family, you know, I was asked to go hunting or fishing. And sometimes people will ask a young man to do it. And it's the family's responsibility to help him provide for that feast or whatever he's requested. And they will give him something for honoring them to do that. And young women are the same way, or young girls, they have their first digging and their first picking. And once you become that, you become providers for your tribe and also teachers. So we're securing that within our youth. So our foods connect us to our culture and the sites in the area. This is a very important area because this is the Columbia, and before you're going down towards Arlington area. And then as you go down, we have different things that show us that are important. Up here on top of the hill, before you drop in the Columbia, these two rocks are what it's called the Watchers. And they watch over the river, and they watch over critical sites related to the fish and the stories that go with that. And there's watchers all along the river, and each one of them have different significance. Some of that knowledge is lost, but some of it's still there. A lot of the people that are fishermen that fish along the river, they know some of those stories more than others that might have been lost. Down here at the bottom, we see the food that they're cooking on the fire pit. That's salmon, eels, smoked salmon. We have deer. This is our Bitterroot. It has salmon in it. And then over here is our Weewanu, our Huckleberry. Our first foods are they're very durable. And so even though the river has changed, before Columbia was flooded, we would fish Salilo, and we had a lot of scaffolds. Now it's more kind of a lake setup, but there's still a lot of scaffolds, and they're along the banks in certain areas because the salmon are still flowing in the original channels underneath the water because it's so hot at the top. They're flowing down at the bottom. Right now, it's so hot that the fish are dying and they're floating up. And so if they are traveling, they're traveling very low and in the bottom of the river on these old channels because that's where it's cold. So one of the important things is, even though when it's time to fish, you have to be their fish. Last year, what was going on was we had that big fire year, and they were telling us you have to stay in for your health, you're going to get sick. But we had people that were fishing on the river, and they were in the smoke the whole time. They could not leave because that is their life. They're Wakanish. It's what they follow. And so if we're not there to gather them, we break the promise we made with them. And also then your families don't have that subsistence need. And so these are fishermen down on the Dalles Dam on the other side of the Dalles Dam in front of Bonneville, or the Dalles Dam. And so these guys are fishing off a scaffold, but they were also running gill nets in the river. And this is just an example. And this was on a good day. They said on several of those days that they could not even see 5 foot in front of them or the people at the end of their boat. So it was very dangerous, but they were still out there doing that. And so they had to be very careful with the barges, and it was really easy for them to get lost. So it's dangerous in some areas, especially when it comes to fishing, but it's very important that we teach that to our children. This is my daughter. She likes to kiss fish. She loves fishies. And so even like our deers, and the one thing when you have climate change is they start moving in areas that they are. Usually the deers are up really close. What has happened is usually by the time our season is done at the end of December 31st, all the elk will move all the way down and they'll be behind the casino. Sometimes they move early, and that can be bad for them because they get chased around a little bit. And if we are still hunting them and we feel that the herd's getting chased around, our Tribal Fish and Wildlife Commission will close parts of the res to protect the herd if they feel they're being impacted too much. And so we constantly are looking at how to regulate and to manage them in a good way so they don't get hurt in the process too. This is some areas like at the very end of April, May, usually this area, because it's in higher elevation, we can continue to dig this into May, the end of May, even June, depending on the year. And so these young kids are learning how to dig couch, one of our roots. And I took a group out where we had kids and older people. One of the projects that we're currently doing is our education and outreach project, where we're helping provide knowledge for our tribal members in a safe capacity. A lot of times our foods grow a long ways. They're not just right behind our back door. Sometimes we have to travel hours, and we like to make sure that people are not only going on the reservation, but off the reservation. So we're trying to work with our community and bring in knowledge keepers, because not all family members have people that continue to dig or harvest, or they've lost information. And a lot of that happened when people were sent out to tribal schools, to Indian schools, where all of a sudden you take the children and you took them away from their parents. And so for 18 years, when they should have been learning how to gather, how to harvest, they didn't learn that. You have some families, when they came back, they retain that knowledge. And so we have some knowledge gaps in there. So as a tribe intercultural resource protection program, how can we bring this knowledge back? Also, because we're working to restore the foods to the system for our tribal members, we have to work to retain cultural knowledge that has either been lost or what's considered as dormant, and to re-bring that back to our people. We are helping them with identifying, locating, knowing the timing to be able to go and harvest, and how to work together to find legal access sites, areas that they can actually harvest, and what's open and unclaimed lands. And not everybody knows that. So we want to make sure that our tribal members are safe in practicing, and that they don't get in trouble in the process, because sometimes they're not taught those things, or it's because they don't know. So how can we help them? And to also help them be teachers later on. This is an image of, this is a group I took out, and we were huckleberry picking up on Tollgate area. And so some of the youth and people have went out before, but this is a group that I was working with our workforce. This is me over here, and my friend I own, and these are from elders to younger kids. Over here, we also gathered medicines, and so we have our roots. And so when you're looking at first foods, it's a loaded process. It's not only just the foods, because after the foods name themselves, the medicinal and the plant properties, they name themselves too. And so we have roots, our couch, or what you would call OSHA, that's very important to us in the sweat or for medicine. We have our teas and different herbs that we're growing. And so we went and gathered, and so the little girls were out kind of, after I came back gathering, my niece had these little girls showed up. And so I was actually teaching them what they were, and they were helping me clean them. And, you know, you never stop teaching. Once you start doing this, that it is your job to teach the youth. So whenever you get a chance, you show them what's important and how to take care of it. So one of the things that we did, we wanted to really bring back the practice of us gathering camas, because that was a practice that was kind of gone from us for about 40 plus years, only because the resource was impacted and there was not a lot of camas in our area. So our tribal elders said, don't harvest it yet. We have to wait until it comes back. And so for 30 years, or maybe 25 years, I remember them telling me that as a young girl. And every year we go out, they say they're starting to come back slowly and slowly. So about 3 years ago, we're like, they're really coming back. We can go harvest now. So we got groups together and we went out and harvest, and they had what was called a timite. This is the ground oven. And right here, you can see it's kind of buried. And the ground oven, you bake it underneath the ground with a lot of hot rocks. And there's different layers of process of when the food goes down there. And it has to cook for 4 days, because camas has a hard sugar in it, and it has to crack before you're able to eat it. So the hard sugar, the sugar molecule is hard. And so when you eat it, if you don't, you won't be able to digest it. So after the cooking process of 3 days, it cracks the sugar molecule in a way that you're able to digest it and turn it into insulin. And so the thing that's really important about our foods is that you can't just go out and gather if you don't know what you're doing, because you can hurt yourself. Even when it comes to medicine, you don't ever go out. We have a lot of foods that have what's called common sisters, and those foods could either be mistaken as food, or they have medicinal purposes. But if you don't know what you're doing, you don't ever go. And that's why it's really important that we teach our children. They have to learn about when it comes up, what it looks like, they have to be able to key it out like a botanist would. And so you have to be very careful and to really reinforce that within your youth and how you harvest and gather, not in just one area. You go across the ridgetop, you gather in a certain way, you dig it up, and when you dig it out, you take the tops and you put it back down into the ground so those seeds can repopulate. And the ground is really hard. If you don't harvest, those foods will start going away, because our Indian foods, a lot of the roots, they have, what happens to them is they will kind of become dormant where they don't produce as much. When you're out in the ground, moving around and digging around them, and as you're walking through them, you're kind of knocking them around, and it does something within that food where its production will increase. And because the food gatherer is digging the ground, it's aerating it, it's fluffing the ground up. And as you put those seeds back in, you're not putting just one seed. One seed might have 20 seeds within it. You're putting all those right back down. So you're basically harvesting and manicuring the areas of those root fields. And so this is a table that represents, we talked about those groupies, and if you look at the top of this table, and this food was all gathered by these kids at that youth camp, and they had more foods that they gathered, some of the foods that we don't really gather anymore. We're trying to bring back the foods we haven't gathered that are still out there. We're bringing that knowledge back because a lot of people have lost that. And so we're working to bring that back to us. And so you have fish, you have deer, you have probably deer stew. I think they had smelt. What else is this? I think they had salwit, which is the Indian carrot, the ani push. They had many different foods along that table. And so we teach the kids about that. And we played games with them where they had to be each food and they had their own plate and they had to run around and work as a team to figure out what order they were going to be on that table. And so we're working out how do we bring that knowledge back to them. And then here's my daughter learning how to scale fish before we can and smoke it. We're working to restore foods back that we haven't had for a while. And so we went out and found the Indian wakto, which is the Indian potato. We hadn't had access to it for about 100 years. Once we located it, we brought a group of us, and this is the first time we ever harvested it. And so we had to relearn how to harvest and gather and to work as a team to find the best practices for it. We're currently working on bringing this sister back home and replanting it and reestablishing it in our territory. We actually found one location on the river after the flood. We refound it. We're working on going out to an unusual in the custom area over in the Portland area to gather cedar root. We wanted to gather cedar root. So we went and gathered it, we learned how to gather it, and then we cleaned it in the river so we could bring it home, so we could learn how to do huckleberry baskets. That teaching had been gone from us from about 40, 50 years. So we had to find a master. Her name was Ramona Kiona from the Yakima Reservation. And there's only a few master teachers of this. And so this last year she brought us out and we had a 2-day workshop where she showed us how to split the cedar and how to start our baskets. We were supposed to go out last year and gather bear grass and have more classes. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to do that. We are working on taking our medicines and creating virtual classes to show our tribal members how to make elderberry syrup and to use more medicinal herbal and medicines that are healthier than pharmaceuticals, because our tribe, it hurts us in different ways. And so we're really working to bring knowledge back. And we're using the virtual platform during COVID to help with that. We're a first food associated culture, meaning that if we didn't have these foods, we have to have the ability to access them. We need to harvest them. We need to learn and know how to prepare them so we can perpetuate our culture, to teach our children, to share that with us and the community, and to be able to consume and have our first foods feast, because we promised that at the beginning of time, and then to be able to have our celebrations related to that, because it's very important to us as a tribal culture. If you don't have fish and you're not able to fish along the river, and all those fishing sites and all the stories and the things related to the Umatilla River for the 80 years we weren't fishing, we lost knowledge related to specific areas, because there's points along the rivers that every single area had an Indian name related to what was being done at that river and the teachings that were associated with that. When that food left, we started losing all that knowledge. And so we lost knowledge, we lost language related to that. Our first foods are related to our treaty rights. We have water rights, fishing rights, hunting rights, raising, gathering rights, and they're very important. And because we have a treaty, it makes these sustainable. They have to be safe to eat, and they're protected, because if they're threatened, the federal government has the duty to be able to stand up for these tribal rights that we secured in the treaty, because treaty rights are what's called the superior right of the land, and they're related to the connections of that, because treaties were signed prior to states. And because our treaties came forward before the state of Oregon was established, it means that law oversees state law. And a lot of people don't understand that. And so treaty rights are very strong and they're protected. We are working to make sure that we are securing and managing these foods in the best way possible and related to the knowledge of our people, because our people have been on this landscape for years. Our traditions are passed down. And so the best person to be able to tell you what's going on with the fish are people who fish all year round, are constantly out there, because a scientist only goes out for so many hours in a week. If you have a 40 hours work week, you have a third of it that's admin time, part of that is drive time. And so they're only actually managing on the landscape a certain part of the time each week. The best person to be able to tell you what's going on are people that are constantly in contact with that, and to use that knowledge and the knowledge of our elders to help create management goals and practices, take that to our scientists, and the science develop the best practice to be able to restore those in a manageable way, where we become twice the managers with our knowledge and science knowledge, that we're able to really lead in that process. We want to make sure that those foods are safe and secured on the landscape, not that we bring them back and grow them in gardens, because we are not garden people. We are people that live off the land, and we go to those foods that naturally grow there. We want to make sure that the fish are there so our young men can go out and become fishermen. They can't become a fisherman if they haven't caught that fish, got it, prepared it, and take care of it. They can't call themselves fishermen, just like a root digger can't call themselves a root digger. A heart surgeon that has never went into surgery, opened up that body and repaired that heart, cannot also call himself a heart surgeon unless the person gets up and lives. So it's very important that we're teaching the way we have always taught, and to be able to secure those teachings for our people. And so that's what I have for you today, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Yeah, thank you. Let me see, let me look at the Q&A very quickly to get these organized, because we had a lot of things come in. So let's start off with this very broad overview question. Why are they called first foods? Could you speak more on why they are called this?
When we talk about those, first foods are the foods from creation, the things that came forward at the beginning of time. When you talk about that kamanwit, that cultural law, those are the foods that came forward at the beginning. So they are the first foods coming forward. Usually when we're associated, we talk about outne tequata, the holy teaching. And first foods for us are foods that are natural to the landscape, to those areas. Those roots have never been altered. They have never been scientifically changed, and they grow by themselves. So they come back every year. And so those foods are the first foods from the way Creator brought them to the land.
Great, thank you so much. I thought that was an important question to start off with. And then the next question is, Are there any mushroom or insect species that are considered to be first foods?
Yes, so anything that grows in the forest related to mushrooms, a lot of the mushrooms had names. I know that, I mean, each species had its own name, and over time, some of our language has been lost. And so we have general terms, but we do gather mushrooms. Some of the ones that the morels, the big one, the hippo, the ones that grow on the, some words I only know the Indian name for, I don't know the real common name for the mushrooms. And some of that knowledge we kind of have lost where we don't gather them as much as we used to. And sometimes we've been really disconnected to some areas too that we harvested. So we're really trying to work, we really want to work on bringing back a lot of that mushroom knowledge. And so we were hoping this year to go out. And I think they went out a couple of times, but working with people that really know some of that information. But yeah, everything has a name. Sometimes we have to reach out to other tribes to help us with some of those.
Thank you. The next question is, I'm 79 years old. As a kid in La Grande, huckleberries were considered relatively easy to find, but were slowly disappearing. Are huckleberries still disappearing, or are they coming back? And then how many first foods are endangered or coming back?
Those are all good questions. Let's start with the huckleberries first. I think that there might have been a lot more huckleberries because the forest was managed a lot more. And because some of the management practices of the forest, what's happening is in some areas, tribal people used to go in and burn and open up areas so the canopy wouldn't enclose. So what happens is over time, you have the huckleberry field and they need that sun. They start getting enclosed by the canopy. And so they're not growing as well as they would be because they start being pushed out. And sometimes the canopy will close, so they're not going. And not only that, fire helps promote, if you have huckleberries and you burn an area, 3 years later, those huckleberries are going to be a lot more productive. The stuff in the ash helps them be more productive, more healthy, and also because you're cutting down all the invaders that are encroaching on them. And so I think it's the management, not only that, it's the heat and the weather. So if you have times when there's not a lot of snow, the snow works as it covers the top of the huckleberries, the roots. So in times when it's super cold, those the snow acts as an insulator, and it slowly releases water. So the roots are able to get stronger. They're protected against the very cold. And if it has no snow on it and a cold spot, it will freeze it. So the ground will freeze all the way down, but when there's snow on top, it doesn't freeze as far down. And then as it melts, it helps make them stronger and bigger. So there's multiple things when you're looking at the effects of that. And if it's real hot, when it got really hot, this is what happened. We have people that are always watching those huckleberry fields. And when we had those hot days, in some areas, it literally dropped the whole berries. And so then the berries have to start all over if they even do. And so we're going to see a year where we might not have as many berries in certain areas because they're sitting out in the heat and it was way too hot way early. So that's going to affect them too.
Thank you. That's really interesting. The next question is, I've been eating wild edibles for the better part of my life and I'm careful about collection. I'm a bit Native American, but mostly not. How do you feel about white people gathering and consuming the same foods that you use in honor, or non-native people in general?
Well, I know for us is that we have treaty rights and the ability to be able to go out and harvest. And I know that the Forest Service have different, they have different policies related to harvesting, gathering, and if people can do that and permitting process of that. I know when it comes to the huckleberries, I use them as an example. People get really protective of that resource alone. And one of the reasons is because you can harvest in a productive way where you're going out and harvest, but if you're going out and taking rakes or taking different things that when you do harvest, if it's damaging the plant or hurting it, and we're always worried about what's called biopiracy or the taking of traditional ways are harvesting where the resource, they're going up for profit. And so when you go out for profit, you're getting as much as you can, and you're not leaving a sustainable amount of them left so they can be sustainable. We have some people who go out and they over harvest so much and they're destroying, or they're just breaking the plant and then picking and throwing it down. And so that plant's not going to be able to come back. Or if they are using rakes, they're using them in a way that it pulls all the leaves off. And so you got to remember that leaves are what does photosynthesis, and it brings that energy back into the plant. And if you're taking it off in a critical time where that plant needs that to be able to bring in the energy to help pull from that part of the stem all the way down to the root system, you're making that plant weak for when it is going into that winter season. And so how do you gather in the best way that's healthy for the plant in all stages of that life cycle? And when you're gathering, you only gather a certain amount, like 10%. So when I bring people out to an area to harvest, I make sure if I'm bringing 20 or 30 people out, I need a field that is very productive, that we're out there for a little bit of time, that we hardly impact that. And so even us coming out, we do what's called recon, where we send me out to look for areas that will be able to be productive enough for the group I'm taking out, and we're not hurting the resource. And then we're starting to look at how do we track that every year or every other, we like to do every other year in areas and monitor them. Is it more productive because we're out there this year? Is there not as many roots? Is there more roots? Like, how can we start management? And there hasn't been a lot of management like that. So we currently created a plant survey, a new plant survey of how we're going to be tracking that and how we're going to look at those things and what the climate change is doing at that time. There's not a lot of information out there like that. So we're working to start establishing different ways to track that and how we can do that in a good way, and to locate some areas where those plants are growing, but they still need time to be able to be productive enough for us to take people to harvest them, or us harvesting because the way we do will help the production. We might find an area that we're like, there's not a lot, but if we gather and put those roots back down, we can help with the production of those. And so looking at those things of how to make that resource better.
Great, thank you. Yes, very important to be very respectful of Indigenous peoples and their harvest practices and just the nature in general. So the next question is, thanks for that great presentation. What are some key things that could be done at a national policy level to support food sovereignty and restoration of first food traditions for tribes across the U.S.?
I think just stronger policies related to different natural plants and different. There's not a lot of policies and procedures made to protect wild natural resources in certain areas. And so sometimes people go through and look at what practices are. Like, for instance, the Forest Service was looking at an area and they had the best thoughts in mind. They're like, we're looking at this area and we notice that every year, it's scab land. They were worried about the wind and things taking dirt away from the area. And they're like, how can we plant grass across that area, or certain types of grass, to help maintain those areas? And we're like, those are very important areas. So I think as managers, we have to look at, like, how are we managing and looking at the species grouping related to that area. And scablands are very important for tribal people because that's where a lot of our traditional first foods grow. And we got to remember that those food base and those natural foods, they are foods for little animals. And if those foods are impacted and they go away, what animal is it going to affect? Because that one root might be the main vitamin source for maybe a raptor or a small mammal or something that might be key that you don't know. And then once you take that food away, all of a sudden you see those animal dies. You're like, why are they dying? We were trying to establish some game birds and they all died and we couldn't figure it out why. And here it was because there was one grass that wasn't growing in our area. So we got to remember that our animals can't just go out to a vitamin store like we need to. So we got to remember that each plant has their specific reason. And when we're doing things to manage the forest, to manage the land, what are the best practices? What is already there that if we plant something else, that doesn't mean that they grow differently, that they impact differently. And so we have to be mindful of what's already there and what it relates to. Everything has an ecological process and they're all working together.
Great, thank you. It's now 7, but we have a lot of questions still in the chat. So if you have time, I would like to extend the.
I always have time because it always happens.
Perfect. So the next question is, first foods include fish, mainly salmon, but you also mentioned whitefish. I believe sucker are included as well.
Whitefish, sucker, smelt, trout, all the the native resident species that are native to those river systems, those are considered first foods too. And the ones that are native, not the ones that came in later. Lamprey eel, you have sturgeon, we have a really big list of them. And we worked with our tribal elders and our fisheries to really write down the list of all the foods that were related, that we have language related to too. And so the list is long, just like with the animals. Anything that is animal based, you know, they have their place. And then the roots and the berries, it's very complex. And so when we're talking about those, it's just a really broad category grouping. And we use the one main, I guess you could call them like the keystone species, but we can't, just because they're keystone species, the little species are important too. My tribal elder told me one time, she said, when they ask, what is the most important thing? Every single thing has a name. They have a use, either food or medicinal or cultural use, and everything is important.
Right, that makes sense. Related to the fish though, in some basins where there might be high concentrations of pesticides or maybe heavy metals, how does that affect your ability to utilize these first foods?
That's a good example. That's a good question. Like, we harvest the salmon, and we've done a lot of studies related to how safe those salmon are. When the studies first came out, it said they had this much traces of mercury or different things in them. And later on, they found out they were only testing on the fillets. Native Americans, we just don't eat the fillet. We dry the backbones, we eat the heads, we dry them, and then once they're dry later on, or they're smoked or whatever we do with them, later on we take them and we put them in water, we boil them, so anything that was left in the bones is going to leach out, and so we're going to digest that. And so there is heavy metals, there's mercury, there's things that aren't so good in our fish species. And our elders will say, this is the way we were taught. We were brought up with this. This is our food. We're still going to go out and gather, and they know that, but these are the foods that were gifted us in the beginning. And so just the time and knowing, like when we found the Indian Wapato out on the upper part of the Columbia over in Richland, we found it and we had it tested, and we wanted to make sure there was no contaminants, because coming on the bottom of Hanford, you know, back in the atomic age when the reactors were running, the water was being dumped right back into the river. So you have contamination in those rivers. So we wanted to make sure that if we were going to bring that resource back home to reestablish populations and we're going to eat it, we had to make sure it was safe. And if it's not safe, how can we work to clean up the area of that resources? And we do have memorandums of agreement up in those areas where we're working to restore the lands and even working with the Hanford Reserve of how do we clean up those areas so one day that they're safe to eat and sustainable so our tribe can go back over and reconnect and harvest there. So we're actually doing that in certain areas where we know they're not as clean, and how can we clean up that river? How do we do that? Who can we partner with to help us do that? And so we do that in areas. And we do test foods to kind of see what that looks like.
Great, thank you so much. I think I'm just gonna ask 2 more questions just to be respectful of your time. So let's see, what is the relationship between TEK, which is traditional ecological knowledge, and science?
Traditional knowledge is a knowledge of people that have always been connected to that place. It is knowledge through stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. It is knowledge of that people who have dug in that land, gathered across that land. They know specific things. Like there's certain areas in certain years that things happen. Like we had that big tsunami, those big earthquakes. When those hit, it tipped the axis of the earth. And as food gatherers, the reason that we noticed was because the sun, when you go gather huckleberries or you go even doing a garden, the sun was setting, not in by my home, it always set like right here. After that happened, it was setting way over here. We had to reposition our whole garden, that even the traditional areas and cultural areas we went before and huckleberry fields, the sun was setting in different areas. And so your fields that you might bring your elders to, instead of them being in shade during the hottest part, all of a sudden that whole area was opened up. The shade wasn't different. And so in the hottest part of the day, you know, that's not an area you want to bring your elders. You had to kind of move, and then it affected the way it landed on berries in certain ways, or even just the way it changed the weather patterns and the effects it has related to roots. And so there's a lot of things that when you have traditional knowledge, you'll have elders tell you that our salmon used to be so prevalent in our rivers, you could walk across their backs. And now you don't see them. There used to be so many mussels and our rivers were clean and pristine, and the lamprey, they came, and then all of a sudden when the salmon left, the mussels left, the eels left. Those are the cleaners of our river. And they can tell you where they were and where they weren't. And a lot of times they'll say, well, it's going to be a really cold winter because the moss already have, some of the moss have fuzz on it, or even just looking at the animals, they can say, well, the animals are shifting and they're changing, they're moving in different patterns. Their fur is coming on earlier, or there's effects they see, they might see them have growths on their bodies. So they're like, you know, something's going on with them, they're sick. All of a sudden we see deer all over the place dying. And so using that knowledge of the people and then working with our tribal scientists, this is what the tribal people are noticing. What can we do science related to create some goals to better manage that related to what they have? And so we work to restore the fish population to historic cultural levels that used to once be there. We might not never get there till we can walk across the fish's back, but we can sure try, and working with our scientists to help us get there.
Thank you. Last question. What impact has climate change had over generations and also generations of first foods? I know you mentioned this a little bit, but if you could say anything else about that.
We have always been resilient. Tribal people have always been affected by climate change. And even though it changes the way foods are on the landscape of sometimes where you're gathering and having to locate them, it's a lot harder now because you have a lot of our foods that are in areas that are land access, they're locked. We can't access areas, or they have been planted over. So it's harder on us than it used to be. before, it was still hard, but they were managing the landscape. They were burning areas to make things more prevalent. They might work with different areas to help maintain that and to help them grow back. Because we're cut off from a lot of area, we see the effects a lot more. And just the changes of fire, and because the forest isn't managed the way it was, there's so much fuel in the forest. When there's a fire, it burns so extremely hot, it just kills everything. We used to manage those forests in a way that, and we were constantly burning back and forth. And if you look at old trapper journals and things, when they were coming through, they would talk about how much smoke was in the area, and they would see people on ridge tops that were managing those fires. We even have cultural stories that talk about how we're doing that. And so we have always been resilient, and we know it's coming, and we're currently working on the climate change adaptation plan. And we've been talking with all of our tribal members, working with our scientists, and we're developing an adaptation plan now for the tribe and how we're going to work with climate change related to our first foods, related to us and our environment and what's important to us. And also looking at our economics, our the government, our impacts that we have too on our economics. And, you know, we have the casino, we have our housing. How does that affect them? And how the more we build, how does that affect those lands? And so looking at all those things, so we're currently in the process of creating the adaptation plan. We're in the drafting and commenting process. So we're definitely working towards that and see what we can do to help.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up the Q&A now. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you
for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you to everyone who also joined us tonight, and a recording of this presentation will be available in the next few days. So have a good night, everyone, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.